The house girl wants to become a fashion designer? The whole dining room burst out laughing. You? Her aunt wiped tears from her eyes, she was laughing so hard. You can't even afford a decent pair of shoes. She sleeps on the kitchen floor, the 16-year-old cousin added. Sleeps on the kitchen floor, and wants to design dresses. The whole house laughed again. Amina stood there, arms straight at her sides, a cleaning cloth still draped over her shoulder. She was 19 years old. She was the housemaid in that very house. She waited for the laughter to finish. Then she asked again, very quietly, "But may I still use the old sewing machine in the storeroom?" 3 years later, the first dress she made on that machine would appear online, under the name of a famous designer, who had trained in Italy. She would run down to the storeroom, and find nothing but an empty hanger. She would stand in that same living room, and say, "That dress is mine." And the aunt, who had laughed at her, would look her straight in the eye, and say, "You are the housemaid in my home." Who exactly do you think will believe you? Not one person in that house believed her. Not one. But 9 years after that night, that very dress would be the design that closed the biggest show at Lagos Fashion Week. The entire hall would rise to its feet. And the people, who used to call her the house girl, would be sitting in the second row, hands over their mouths. Stay with me until the end of this story. And if you have ever been laughed at for your dream, or had your work stolen by someone else, subscribe right now, because this story is for you. But to understand why that night mattered so much, we have to go back to the beginning. To the day Amina Yusuf left her village. Amina grew up in one room in Kajola, a village about 6 hours from Lagos. Her father died when she was 8. After that, her mother sold vegetables at the roadside, up before 5 to cut them, sitting under the same tree, until dark, coming home with whatever had not sold, and a back that never fully straightened again. Amina was clever. Not ordinarily clever, she came first in her school 7 years running. Her headmaster once walked to their house to tell her mother that this girl had to keep studying. The day her admission letter came, the house went silent. Because the first year's fees came to more than her mother earned in 2 years. That night Amina heard her mother crying in the kitchen. She cried very quietly, the way people cry when they do not want to be heard. The next morning Amina folded the letter, put it at the bottom of a box, and told her mother she would stay and help her sell. She stayed for a year. Then an aunt from Lagos came home for a funeral, looked Amina up and down, and told her mother she was wasting the girl in the village. That is how Amina came to be standing at that bus park. That morning, the whole of Kajola village came out to the dusty bus park before sunrise. Most of them were not there to see anyone off. They came because they had heard that the daughter of the woman who sold vegetables by the roadside was leaving for Lagos. Amina stood beside an old faded bus, holding a battered suitcase, with a broken corner tied together with blue nylon rope. Inside it was everything she owned: 3 dresses, 1 worn pair of sandals, a notebook, 50 naira, and an old sewing needle wrapped in a handkerchief. The laughter started with an elderly woman near the gate. That girl is going to Lagos? That city will swallow her before sunset. 1 month, another said. 1 month and she'll be back here begging to sell vegetables again. She's never even ridden in an elevator, a young man smirked. Amina lowered her head. Every word hurt. But she said nothing. Then Tund pushed through the crowd. The young man she had quietly hoped would one day become her husband. For 1 second her heart lifted, maybe he had come to encourage her. But he stopped 3 steps away, hands buried deep in his pockets, and his eyes never quite met hers. I think we're wasting our time. I've met someone in Lagos. Before she could even breathe, he added, my future can't be tied to someone who owns nothing. Then he turned and walked away. Right there in the bus park. In front of everyone. And nobody defended her. Amina stood with her hand clenched around the handle of that suitcase until her mother came to her. Hawa said nothing to the crowd. She simply put her arms around her daughter and whispered into her ear, "People may see poverty before they see you. But never let poverty become who you are." Amina climbed onto the bus. As the engine roared to life, she looked through the dusty window. Her mother stood alone in the middle of the bus park, still smiling through tears, still waving. And Amina whispered to herself, "I may leave this place poor, but I will never come back defeated." Lagos was louder than anything she had imagined. Cars. Horns. Crowds. Buildings so tall she had to tilt her head all the way back to see the top of them. For the first 3 days, she felt invisible. Not in a poetic way, in a frightening way. In the village, everyone knew whose daughter she was. Here, she could have collapsed at the roadside, and the crowd would simply have flowed around her. Her aunt, Auntie Beezy, met her with a cold smile. "I'll let you stay. But understand something, nothing here is free." From the very first morning, Amina woke at 4 o'clock. Sweep the compound. Cook breakfast. Wash clothes by hand. Scrub the bathrooms. Iron the uniforms. Watch the children. Go to the market. Cook lunch. Cook dinner. Wash up again. Near midnight, she would finally unroll a thin mat on the kitchen floor. That was where she slept. She learned the particular sounds of that house at night, the refrigerator humming beside her head, the generator outside, the tap that dripped no matter how hard she turned it. She learned to sleep, with her arm folded under her head, because there was no pillow, and to wake, before anyone came downstairs, so no one would ever see her lying there. Auntie Beezy's 2 children, Kemi, 19, and Tolu, 16, never once called her by her name. "Hey, housegirl, get me some water." "Where's the housegirl? My shirt isn't ironed." Amina never answered back. Not once. She simply did the work. And every night, before she lay down on that mat, she took out her notebook and wrote one line about the day. Just one. Then she put it away. There were nights the line was only 3 words long. But she never skipped a night. Then one rainy afternoon, while taking out the trash, she saw it. In the storeroom behind the house, among boxes of old things and cobwebs, sat a rusted sewing machine. The wheel barely turned. The belt was snapped. Dust covered everything. Amina stood there for a long moment. Then she reached out and wiped the dust from the body of the machine with her hand. And something inside her stirred. When she was small, her mother had taught her to mend torn clothes by hand. The 2 of them used to sit on the veranda in the late afternoon, and her mother would guide her fingers through every stitch. She had loved that feeling, making something whole out of 2 separate pieces of cloth. She had never forgotten it. The next day, she gathered her courage. And you already know what happened. She asked for permission to use the old sewing machine. The whole house laughed in her face. Her aunt told her she could not afford a decent pair of shoes. Her cousin reminded her that she slept on the kitchen floor. But when the laughter finally died down, Auntie Beezy waved a dismissive hand. "Fine, use it. It's junk anyway. But only after your work is done. And don't make noise." That was all Amina needed. That night, when the house had gone quiet, she went down to the storeroom. She sat on the concrete floor and looked at that machine for 10 full minutes. Just looked at it. Then she began. She took out a piece of a punctured bicycle tube she had picked up off the road the week before, cut it to length, and made herself a new drive belt. She cleaned every part she could reach, with leftover cooking oil. She put it back together. And she pressed the pedal. The machine screeched. It shook. It leaned to one side, as though it were about to fall over. But it ran. Amina sat there in that dark storeroom, under the light spilling in from the hallway, and she smiled, the first real smile since she had arrived in Lagos. From that night on, every night was the same. From 11 at night until 2 or 3 in the morning, while the entire house slept, Amina taught herself fashion design. She learned from free videos on a second-hand phone, with a crack running diagonally across the screen. She kept the volume at its lowest setting, and held it close to her ear. She took apart old garments people had thrown out, just to understand how they had been made. She unpicked every seam, laid each piece flat, and traced their shapes into her notebook. A sleeve stopped being a sleeve to her, it became a curved shape that had to meet another curved shape at exactly the right angle, or the whole thing would pull wrong across the shoulder. She practiced sleeves, collars, pleats, invisible zippers. She ruined dozens of pieces of fabric. She pricked her fingers until they bled so many times that the tips of them turned hard. Some nights she fell asleep sitting at the machine, and woke with the mark of the pedal frame pressed into her leg. Then 4 o'clock came, and she got up to start another day as a housemaid. She had no teacher, no money, no good fabric. She only had stubbornness. And a dream not one person in the world believed in. 2 years passed like that. 2 years of 4 hours of sleep. 2 years of being called the housegirl during the day, and being something else entirely between 11 at night and 3 in the morning. There were weeks she wanted to stop. There was one particular week, when she ruined the same collar 4 nights running, and she sat on that concrete floor at 2 in the morning, and asked herself out loud what exactly she thought she was doing. She kept going anyway. Not because she was certain. Because stopping felt worse. There was one moment in that second year that she never told anybody about for a very long time. It was a Sunday. The family had gone out. Amina had the house to herself for the first time in months, and instead of resting, she spent 6 hours making a simple blouse, the first thing she had ever made, that she was genuinely proud of. She was still holding it when they came home. Kemi took it out of her hands, looked at it for 2 seconds, and dropped it on the sofa. "It's crooked here," she said, and walked upstairs. It was not crooked. Amina checked it 3 times that night. But that was the moment she learned something important about people who look down on you. They are not actually assessing your work. They decided what you were worth long before they looked at it, and nothing you hold up will change the verdict. Once she understood that, their opinion lost most of its power over her. She stopped showing anyone anything. She just worked. And by the 3rd year, something had changed. Amina's hands were different now. Her seams ran straight and even. She could look at a dress for 3 seconds, and know how it had been cut. Then one day she found a bundle of leftover Ankara fabric that the tailor's shop at the top of the street had thrown out, off-cuts, none of them large enough to make anything decent from. Amina carried them home. It took her 7 nights. She joined those scraps in a way nobody had thought of before, the color blocks running diagonally across the body, the shoulders gathered into pleats, and at the waist a knotted detail she invented herself, after taking apart 3 old dresses to understand how the tension there worked. On the 7th night, she finished. And she sat looking at it for a long time. Then she did something very private. She opened the handkerchief, took out her mother's old sewing needle, and hand-stitched the final line, the hem, with that needle. It was the first dress she had ever truly designed. The next morning she hung it on a hook behind the storeroom door to let the fabric stiffener dry. And Kemi walked past. She stopped. She pushed the door open. She stood looking at the dress for quite a while. Then she took out her phone, and took several photographs, the front, the back, the waist, the shoulders, and walked out. Amina saw her do it. She thought nothing of it. 6 weeks later, it happened. That evening Kemi and her friends were huddled around a phone in the living room, squealing. "Oh my God, this is beautiful. Is that the new House of Rank collection?" Amina was wiping a table nearby. She glanced at the screen. And she froze. On that screen was her dress. Not something similar. It was that dress. The diagonal color blocks. The pleated shoulders. The knotted waist detail she had spent 3 nights inventing. Underneath was a line of text, an exclusive design by Roncadeli. "That dress is mine," Amina said. She ran down to the storeroom. She pushed the door open. The hook was still there. The dress was not. She stood in that dark storeroom holding an empty hanger, listening to laughter drifting down from upstairs. Then she ran back up, out of breath. "Where is the dress? Who took my dress?" Auntie Beezy came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "What is all this noise about?" "Auntie, the Ankara dress I made. It is online now, under somebody else's name." Auntie Beezy looked at her for a long moment. Then she spoke in exactly the tone people use, with a child, who is making things up. "Amina. Roncadeli is a famous designer. She trained in Italy." She sighed. "You are the housemaid in my home. Who exactly do you think will believe you?" Kemi's friends giggled. One of them said, not bothering to lower her voice, she probably saw it online, and convinced herself it was hers. Amina looked around that room, one face at a time. Not one of them believed her. Not one. After everyone had gone up to their rooms, Amina went down to the storeroom, sat on the concrete floor beside the sewing machine, and cried. She cried from 10 at night, until nearly 4 in the morning. 3 years. Thousands of hours. Fingertips gone hard as leather. 7 straight nights for one dress. And all she had to show for it was a photograph on a phone screen, under somebody else's name. Do you know what most people would do in that moment? They would stop. Not because they are weak, but because there is a kind of injury that teaches a person that trying is pointless. If it were you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments, I really want to know. But around 4 in the morning, Amina wiped her face. She opened her notebook and read the line she had written on the very first page 3 years earlier, the night she arrived in Lagos. People may see poverty before they see you. But never let poverty become who you are. She sat looking at it for a long time. Then she picked up her pen, and underneath it she wrote a second line, "They took the dress. They did not take these hands." And that is what saved her. Because Amina understood something, that night, a person can steal a product. But nobody can steal the ability that made it. Amina started again. But this time she did it differently. She stopped hiding her work in a storeroom. She began taking in mending for the neighbors in the evenings. Her first customer was a woman named Nkechi, from the house across the street, a torn trouser hem, 200 naira. Amina did not just fix the hem. She also took in the waist, that had always been slightly too loose, the one Nkechi had been managing, with a belt for 2 years. And she did not charge extra for it. 3 days later, Nkechi brought 2 friends. Then mending turned into uniforms. The headmistress of a small private nursery nearby ordered 30 sets. It was the largest order of Amina's life. She sewed for 14 nights straight. Those 30 uniforms came out so well that parents started asking who had made them. Then one day a woman knocked at Auntie Beezy's gate and asked for the tailor. It was Amina's first wedding dress order. She took it. Even though she had never made a wedding dress in her life. It took her a month. She bought 2 old wedding gowns from the second-hand market and took them apart completely, down to the last seam, just to understand how the structure held itself up. And she made a dress that had the bride in tears at the very first fitting. That bride referred her younger sister. The sister referred her best friend. And so it went. By the 4th year, Amina moved out of Auntie Beezy's house. She rented a small room in Mushin, just big enough for a bed, and 2 sewing machines, the old machine, from the storeroom, which Auntie Beezy told her to take away, and get out of my sight, and one she was paying for in installments. The day she carried her things out, through that gate, Auntie Beezy stood on the veranda, and said, "You'll be back. It isn't easy out there." Amina simply nodded goodbye and left. The next 2 years were the hardest of her working life, and nobody ever tells this part of the story. She had freedom now, but freedom does not pay rent. There were months she accepted more orders than her hands could physically finish, and delivered them by staying awake 3 nights in a row. There was a month a customer refused to pay for a completed dress, and Amina had no contract, no lawyer, and no way to argue, so she absorbed the loss, and ate Gary for 2 weeks. There was a night the landlord came for rent she did not have, and she sold the newer of her 2 sewing machines to cover it. She kept the old one. The broken one. The one held together with a bicycle tube. Years later she would tell people that selling that one was never an option. Then social media happened. It began completely by accident. A customer filmed a short video of Amina hand stitching a bodice, 2 hands moving very fast, and very precisely, under a yellow bulb, in a cramped little room, with fabric stacked against every wall. She posted it, with a caption, "This is how my dress was made." The video reached 2 million views in 4 days. What made people stop scrolling was not the dress. It was the room. People saw a woman making something beautiful in a tiny space, with 2 old machines, and they saw themselves in it. Comments poured in by the thousand. "Do you take orders? Where are you located? I want one made for my mother's anniversary." Within 2 weeks, Amina had over 400 messages. She stayed awake whole nights just answering them. And then she did something she would always call the most important decision of her life. Instead of accepting every order to make fast money, she turned most of them down, and she made a phone call home. She called her mother. "Mama, do the women in our village still sew?" "Of course they do, my daughter. But nobody orders anything. Ask around for me. Find out who would come down to Lagos and work with me. I'll pay wages. I'll train them." 4 women came down that month. 6 months later there were 11. She trained them the way nobody had ever trained her, patiently, from the beginning, with no mockery, when they got something wrong. One of them, a woman of 53, who had never touched a professional machine in her life, cried the first time Amina handed her a finished garment, and said, "You made this. Your hands did this." Then one evening in November, Amina's phone rang. It was an assistant to the singer Leo Bankole. The singer had seen the video, and she wanted a dress for the National Music Awards. In 10 days. Amina took it. She and her team worked in shifts. She did not sleep more than 4 hours on any of those 10 nights, which by then was simply her normal life. On the night of the awards, Leo Bankole stepped onto the red carpet in that dress. And Nigerian social media exploded. When a reporter asked who the designer was, the singer said, into the microphone, "Her name is Amina Yusuf. She taught herself to sew on the floor of a storeroom. Remember that name." The next morning, Amina had more than 20,000 messages. The next 3 years went by like a flood. The small workshop in Mushin became a bigger one in Suralere. Then a showroom in Lekki. She registered the brand, and named it, with the very name people had laughed at in that bus park. Amina Designs. She hired staff. And she hired by a strange rule no company in Lagos followed. She did not require a fashion qualification. She handed applicants a piece of fabric and a machine, and said, "Do whatever you want with this. You have 3 hours." She had learned a great deal about what a certificate does, and does not prove. She built 2 other things into that company that nobody asked her to build. The first was a rule about names. Every finished garment that left her workshop carried a small card inside it, with the name and photograph of the woman who had made it. Buyers loved it, and it became part of the brand's identity, but that was not why Amina did it. She did it because she had spent 4 years being called the house girl, and she had decided that nobody working for her would ever be a nameless pair of hands. The second was the training floor. Any woman who came in without skills was put on full pay from day one and taught for 6 months before she was expected to produce anything sellable. Her accountant told her repeatedly that this was financially irrational. Amina's answer never changed: somebody once let me use a broken machine. That was the whole difference. By the 9th year, since she left her village, Amina Designs had more than 120 employees. More than 80 of them were women from rural areas, most of whom had never finished secondary school. And then the invitation arrived. Lagos Fashion Week. Not a small corner of the exhibition space. A solo runway slot on the main stage on the second night. Amina read the letter 3 times. Then she did something her assistant could not understand. She had an invitation sent, a front row VIP invitation, to an address in Ikeja. Auntie Beezy's house. Ma, the assistant asked, who lives here? Amina looked at the card for a moment. That is where I slept on a kitchen floor for 4 years, she said. Just send it. On the night of the show, the hall was full. The front row held fashion journalists, investors, and some of the most recognizable faces in Nigeria. And in the second row on the right, 3 people sat in an unusual kind of silence. Auntie Beezy, her hair gone mostly gray. Tolu, now 25. And Kemi. Kemi sat very straight, hands flat on her knees, eyes fixed on the runway. For 40 minutes of waiting, she did not say a single word. 15 minutes before the show, backstage, Amina stood in front of a mirror. She was wearing a simple black outfit. And she did something nobody saw. She opened an old handkerchief, the same handkerchief that had traveled with her from the bus park in Kajola 9 years earlier, and took out her mother's sewing needle. She pinned it inside her lapel, right over her heart. The lights went down. The music began. And the collection walked out. 32 designs. All of them made from hand-woven fabric, from craft villages in the north and the east. Every single piece carried some hand-stitched detail that no machine could produce. Sitting in the 3rd row was a buyer from a department store in Johannesburg, who had flown in for 2 days. In the 4th row was a fashion editor, who had written, 18 months earlier, that Nigerian ready-to-wear had run out of ideas. Both of them were leaning forward by the 6th look. The hall grew quiet in the way a room goes quiet, when people know they are looking at something real. Backstage, Amina watched on a small monitor, with her hands folded in front of her mouth. Beside her stood 4 of the women, who had come down from Kajola in that very first month, women who had never in their lives been inside a building like this one, now watching garments they had stitched with their own hands walk under those lights. One of them was crying. Amina reached over, without looking, and held her hand. Then came the final look. And the entire room went still. It was an Ankara dress. Diagonal color blocks running across the body. Pleated shoulders. And at the waist, a very distinctive knotted detail. It was that dress. The dress she had made, over 7 nights in a storeroom. The dress that had been photographed and taken. But this time it was made in hand-woven silk, and it was 10 times more refined than the original. In the catalog handed to every guest, beneath the photograph of that final design, there was a single line of text. Original, 2016. Made in a storeroom. In the 2nd row on the right, Kemi raised a hand to cover her mouth. Then the lights swung toward the wings. And Amina Yusuf walked out. The entire hall rose to its feet. The applause went on for nearly 2 minutes. Amina bowed. She looked at the front row, then at the second. She saw Auntie Beezy applauding, her eyes red. She saw Kemi, with her head down, her shoulders shaking. She said nothing at all. She simply bowed once more, and walked back in. After the show, in the reception area, Auntie Beezy came to find her. The woman stood in front of her, and for a long moment she could not speak at all. Then she said, her voice thick, I don't know what to say. Amina looked at her. Do you know what she could have said in that moment? She could have mentioned the kitchen floor. The name Housegirl. The night the whole family stood there, and not one of them believed her. One sentence, and this woman would have carried it for the rest of her life. But Amina only said, I'm glad you came, Auntie. Then Kemi stepped forward. Her eyes were swollen. Amina. She stopped. Then she spoke very fast, as though afraid she would lose her nerve. That dress. I photographed it, and sent the pictures to a girl I knew, who worked at Ronkadeli's studio. I only meant to show it off. I didn't think they would, she broke into tears. For 9 years I haven't slept properly. I mean that. I'm sorry. Amina was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I remember all of it. Every part. I remember the night you told a whole room that I was making it up. Kemi lowered her head. But I remember something else too, Amina said. That night was the night I wrote the second line in my notebook. I wrote, they took the dress, they did not take these hands. She looked at Kemi. If you had not taken that dress, I might still be sitting in that storeroom, sewing for my own amusement, never brave enough to show anyone my work. You taught me a lesson I did not want, but one I needed. She paused. I forgive you. I forgave you a long time ago, not because you deserved it, but because I did not want to carry it anymore. It was heavy. Kemi sobbed. But listen to me, Amina went on, and her voice changed. Forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. I am not going to give you a job at my company. I am not going to hand you an opportunity. Kemi looked up, confused. Because you do not need me to, Amina said. You are 28 years old. You have 2 hands. What I have, I did not ask anyone for. I sat in a storeroom for 3 years, and earned it. She put a hand on Kemi's shoulder. Go and build your own. And when you have built it, you will understand why I gave you nothing today. That is the gift. 3 months after that show, Amina went back to Kajola. She did not go alone. She brought a team and a signed contract. She opened a garment workshop in the village itself, the first in that village's history. 43 women were hired, trained on full pay, from the very first day. And she opened a free vocational class for the young girls of the area, 6 months per cohort. On opening day, the whole village came. There were faces Amina recognized immediately. The elderly woman, who had said, that city will swallow her. The young man, who had said she's never even ridden in an elevator. They stood at the back now, clapping very quietly. And near the gate, one man stood apart from everyone. Tund. He was much older than he had been 9 years earlier. He did not come forward. He simply stood there, watching. Amina saw him. The two of them looked at each other for about 3 seconds. Then she nodded, the small nod you give an old acquaintance you pass on the street, and turned back to finish cutting the ribbon. That was all. Not one word. Not one line of revenge. Because she no longer needed him to know who she was. When they invited her to say a few words, Amina took the microphone, and stood in silence for a while. Then she said, 9 years ago, I left a bus park 200 meters from here with a suitcase tied together with nylon rope. Inside it were 3 dresses, 1 worn pair of sandals, a notebook, and a sewing needle. She reached into her lapel and unpinned the needle, holding it up. This needle. The whole compound went silent. A great many people laughed at me that day. I remember every one of them. But I am not standing here to talk about that. She turned toward the front row, where a small woman, with white hair was sitting. I am standing here, because on that day, in the middle of all that laughter, one person put her arms around me, and said, "People may see poverty, before they see you, but never let poverty become who you are." Her voice broke. I have lived 9 years on that one sentence. She stepped down, walked to her mother, and placed the sewing needle into the palm of her hand. Howell looked at the needle. Then she gripped her daughter's hand and wept. "You did it," she said. Amina shook her head. "We did it, Mama." Amina's story reminds us of a few very simple things. People can take your product. They can put their name on your work and stand there accepting praise for it. But there is one thing no one can take, the ability that created it. A thief only ever gets one thing. The maker gets everything that comes after. And if someone laughs at your dream today, remember that they are only looking at your starting point and mistaking it for your destination. Amina began with a broken sewing machine in a storeroom, a strip of bicycle tube, and 4 hours of sleep a night. 9 years later, an entire hall stood up for her. Not because she got lucky, but because in those 9 years, there was not a single night she allowed anyone else to decide who she was. If this story touched you, leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from, share it with someone who needs to hear this today, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you in the next story.